We often hear about our differences, but we are so similar here in the Caribbean region and so close that when one thing happens in one part of the region, other countries literally have to weigh in and be a part of it. Welcome to Sharing Experiences, because that is exactly what we will be doing with this webinar. I'm Tisha Hines, and today we are working with the Department of Emergency Management to reach out to a number of Caribbean neighbors and share experiences, as the title of the webinar suggests. We are talking about the response to volcanic hazards. And nobody knows better than those of us here in the region about all that happened just a few short months ago in neighboring St Vincent and the Grenadines, where we had the eruption of a volcano there. So we're going to be getting into that and sharing a little bit more about how it affected each country that was directly or indirectly involved, but more than talking about the planning and how we can be able to format a plan to go forward together. Joining us today is Carrie Hines, who is Director of the Department of Emergency Management, or EM, right here in Barbados. Hi there, Carrie.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Wonderful to be able to speak with you as well. Tia Brown is a meteorologist with the Barbados Meteorological Service here in Barbados at the Grenadines International Airport.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Also with us is Michelle Forbes, Director of the National Emergency Management Organization, or NEMO, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, all, and thanks for having us here.
And we also have with us Pat Joseph, who is Director of the Seismic Research Center in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me.
All right, so this is a really big topic and pretty heavy. And each of you ladies, separately, I'm sure we can have an individual seminar or webinar that asks for the same time to get the webinar, but to do experiences as it suggests, and kind of see where things lined up, where we could do better, how we were able to prep and prepare, and what we need to do going forward. And for that reason, I would love to start talking about all that happened with the Soufrière eruption. And for that reason, I'd like to start with the DEM, and to start with you, of course, Dr. Hines. Carrie, Barbados, we had a lot of ashfall. So talk to us about, how you were prepping, even as we were hearing about what was happening in neighboring St. Vincent.
Thanks for the question. We are all a part of a regional system, and the system we had to support in two fronts, really. We supported the coordination and response to St. Vincent with the last Soufrière eruption. So we were in numerous coordination meetings at the regional level, supporting that potential response to that event, looking at what type of resources we would have to support St. Vincent with, whether that be technical or human or equipment resources. And then at the national level, we were continuing to monitor the situation here at the Department of Emergency Management, and with the support and collaboration of the various scientific partners, those of which are on the line today, the Seismic Research Center, our local Barbados Meteorological Services, and also the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, because we look to not only monitor the actual eruption, but we also were very privy in terms of monitoring what would be the potential fallout for or significant impact for Barbados. So looking at the scenarios, looking at what the dust plumes and the possibility of some level of impact here. And all in all, that also meant that we were pushing a lot of information as well out to our public, ensuring that we kept them abreast of what was going on um, as we went through this particular event, which was very new to a number of us here on the island of Barbados.
Michelle, who is director of NEMO in St Vincent and the Grenadines. And I know you've been living with La Soufrière for quite some time. So talk to us about what is done on the ground in St. Vincent to keep your population aware of the volcano and of the hazards.
We, over the years, over 15 years, I think, in succession, we have been doing a lot of programs in collaboration with the Seismic Research Center to continue to inform the populace of the risks that are living with here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and especially on mainland with the La Soufrière volcano. So we have worked significant efforts, or we have put significant efforts in the community-driven part of it, and are looking a bit at the citizen science component of it. So every year prior to the volcano, we would have had a break after 2019 because of the pandemic. So 2020, we were not able to go out in the communities as we would like. But every year, we would have a series of activities around the volcano awareness activities. We have been doing that at different levels, at the primary school level, at the secondary school level, and at the community level, because we know as we got further away from the last eruption of the volcano, people will start to forget that we are living with the volcano. So that was part of our way to remind persons. We also had a very popular annual hike to the volcano, where it grew so big we had to reduce the number of persons going to the volcano with us. So every year we would have about over 100 persons climbing the volcano with us. So we'd also always include the schools because we want to ensure that that knowledge is passed on. So we have been working on volcanic hazards for quite some time, and different programs and projects with different universities around the world, and of course mainly with our scientists in Trinidad. And that allowed us to continue to inform the populace of what was happening with the volcano and what they need to expect for the future. We had also embarked on updating our volcano plan, because our national disaster plan was 2005, and we updated it in 2014 with the SVG Red Cross and the French Red Cross PIRAC, to ensure that it was a bit more up to date, and looking at the census data, ensuring that we had the right population in these areas, because we know at a rough figure we would have about 20,000 persons that need to evacuate. So we updated it then, and we also tested the plan in 2019 during the regional trade winds exercise, which was held in St. Vincent and Grenadines that year. Test our plan to look at the gaps and look at the procedures to ensure that it was, things were where we needed it to be. And when the volcano started its effusive eruption in December 2020, we started again reviewing the plan with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management agencies, because once the volcano alert was raised to orange, it meant also that the regional mechanism was activated. So CDEMA, the Department of Emergency Management, we were in constant contact, because Barbados is our focal point. So if anything happens, they have to support the response to St. Vincent through the CDEMA regional response mechanism. So during the months or weeks from December to March, we looked at the gaps again in the plan, looking to ensure that we had the communities know where they were going in terms of the assembly points, what they had to do, know the shelters that were available, and general tips, of course, of how do you prepare for the volcano. We were restricted in early 2021 because of the increase of the COVID cases, and we were not able to go to the communities as much. But we did a lot of what we call some short caravans, where to stop going to the corner or the block and really giving out the information on what was happening with the volcano. We kept the public up to date on the bulletins from the Seismic Research Center and tips on what they have to do. And that continued even during the eruption. So quite a bit of activities we have been doing over the years, because preparing for volcanic emergency is not an overnight thing. So we have been preparing for quite a period of time to continue to inform and sensitize persons that we are living with this risk, and we need to be reminded that it is going to erupt in the future.
What the general public of the various islands don't see is all of the collaboration that's going on behind the scenes. And you talked a lot about your dealings with the Seismic Research Center in Trinidad. So I'd like to go now to Director Joseph to talk a little bit about their predictions and their work with the La Soufrière volcano leading up to the eruption. And really, the question, did you predict that the volcano would be as explosive as it turned out to be?
So one of the ways in which we look at how a volcano behaves is to look at its historical activity. So in the past, we would have examined the deposits associated with the volcano as well as its historical eruptions. We would have created what is a picture that's seen by many right now. That Volcanic has a map which has the red, the orange, the yellow, and the green zones. So this is based on the type of eruptions and the intensity of the eruptions. So yes, we do expect a certain type of magnitude of eruptions associated with La Soufrière. The key was trying to gauge that transition, because as you have seen, La Soufrière can exhibit both types of eruptions in terms of effusive, which is the dome forming ones. It's a gentle extrusion of magma at the summit. And then that can transition to explosive, which everybody saw happen in April. So with that in mind, we were thinking that the size of the explosions would have been similar to what may have been experienced in 1972. However, what actually did happen, because of the size of the dome that was created before and other processes happening beneath the volcano, when it did become explosive, it ended up being more similar to the 1902 style of explosive eruptions. But yes, we were expecting that the events could become as explosive as it did. The timing, however, was the key.
And that is exactly, what we found out down to timing. I know that the Barbados Met Office is usually the first to know when a natural phenomenon will affect the island. So I'd like to switch gears and kind of bring you into it at this point. At what point did that particular agency detect that this plume of ash would come toward Barbados? Because that was what Barbadians were feeling just after the eruption. So that happened on Friday, and by Saturday morning, Barbados was in darkness.
So we were constantly monitoring the situation with the Soufrière volcano since the effusive eruption started. And once we would have had the explosive eruption, we started to look at all the tools we had, which would have been the satellite imagery, because that would have been able to pick up the eruption. And based on that, we actually started to see the ash plume as it rose very high in the atmosphere start to move across Barbados. And because we knew what the winds were at the upper levels in the atmosphere, we knew that they would have brought some of that ash across the island. So we were constantly monitoring the winds to see the wind speed, to see how fast it would come over us, because that was one of the main questions we were getting. When are we going to expect the ash to come over us? What we didn't know was the concentrations, how much ash would have been blanketing the island, but we tried to gauge an idea as to when we would have started to be affected by the ash fall. It was a very interesting time because we went on the observation deck and everyone was looking up to the sky, looking to see what it was going to look like. because we never experienced anything like it before. So we were all just looking to see when the ash started to come over, you could see a significant decrease in visibility towards Saturday.
Director Hines, in spite of this, and I know that Ms. Brown talked about them preparing and preparing us, we most certainly did not expect the amount of ash fall that we experienced. Talk to us about what the DEM was doing behind the scenes to prepare this.
Okay, I agree with Ms. Brown. For us, I think it was a case where the novelty of the entire situation. Yes, there were historical accounts of the eruption and ashfall that would have impacted Barbados years before, but there was a large segment of the population that really would not have experienced that before. Um, and to a number of us within the system as well, not just DEM, but within the wider system, would not have experienced something like that before. But with any hazard that would affect, there are certain emergency support functions and management functions that you would have to do. There was the whole question of information management, pushing information out to the public, general tips on what they needed to do, and we were also fielding information. Um, we were doing this against a backdrop of a COVID environment. So there was a lot of virtual coordination, a lot of briefing meetings, and interacting with the various partners, with various donors, stakeholders. We had to brief the political directorate, and we were interacting, not, as I said before, not only at the national level with the various stakeholders, but at the regional level, because we still had to support St. Vincent, because we are the central sub-regional focal point of SEDIMA, and we do have responsibilities um, to the islands within that central sub-region focal point, of which St. Vincent is one. So it was a very hectic time. There was a lot of information, and I think too, because of the novelty of the situation, there were things that we were going through as we went along. But we had the system, we have the National Emergency Management System in place, and that is what we utilize to ensure that we made good on a number of the responses to the actual event. So information management, pushing of information out to the public, um, as I said, getting stocks and inventory ready in the case that we had to support St. Vincent. Also, there was the possibility that Barbados may have to receive a number of evacuees if that was the option taken by the affected country. So there was a lot of stakeholder coordination and meetings at that time. And then, as I said, there was the novelty of the whole situation. Um, Possibly, I would say, for some persons, because it was new to them, I think you can say in some instances there was an underestimation of how it really impacted Barbados.
Said, let's head back to where everything really happened, which was St. Vincent, and go back to Nemo there. Director Forbes, work that you did on the ground, going out in your caravans, talking to people on the corners, on the blocks, getting information out. Did they take heed? We know there wasn't an eruption for so nobody of our generation really had experienced this. Did the residents of St. Vincent listen when you said this is imminent?
Difficult question to really gauge. I from where we sit, we many persons listened and many persons did not listen, if I want to put it that way. I think a lot of persons were of the perception that the volcano would behave as it did in 1971, 72, with that effusive eruption, and it will take a while before we had that explosive eruption. But they were wrong, because the volcano is not going to tell us. It doesn't. We don't have a contract with the volcano to say, "Hey, I'm going to come tomorrow or next week." And many persons were of that perception. So we had persons who thought, "Well, oh, it's not going to happen now," and there are those who said, "Well, remember, the volcano has a tradition or history of erupting around the Easter vacation, Easter break, around that time," and so it did. And so I think that was part of the downside to us, is that many persons did not take it seriously. So when persons were to evacuate, did not have things ready for to move with. And then there are some who he definitely would have gone through, and you said it, we those who would have experienced it from 1979 prepared a bit better, especially the older folks. I know they would have had those who had persons in the green zone or the safe zone would have started preparing before by sending things ahead to their families in Kingstown in the green zone, so that in the event that they have to evacuate, they would not have to waste time and pack their grab and go bag. A lot of the agencies, we kept preparing, we kept saying to them, I said, look, we were getting close, and sometimes it's not until when the event happens you really see how prepared you were, because you can have all the plans on paper, you can do your test runs. We had tabletop exercise, virtual exercises a week or two before, and coincidentally the scenario was quite similar. What happened at the same time when we had the scenario? So some agencies were prepared, some people were prepared. I think we more could have prepared a little better. And it's not until when the event happened you really see how things are going to unfold.
Director Forbes, bring us inside of yours at the time where everything was crunch time and everything was happening, and it was the minute where you needed to get, and you knew that people would need to be evacuated, and everything that you were training for, it was in front of you. What was happening in your office at that time?
I would say it started a little before that, about after 5 that on the morning of the 8th to be exact. And I had quite a restless night. And actually today is a year since I actually had an accident the day before evacuation. And so I had quite a restless night. And I was monitoring the volcano, I was monitoring the signals, because we can monitor remotely now. And when Professor Robertson, who was a resident scientist at that time, called after 5, I expected him to call, because we have been monitoring, we have been speaking with the scientists, we have been observing and watching what was happening. So I then had to call my minister, who is actually the Honorable Prime Minister, before 6 o'clock that morning. And I'm like, I said, Prime Minister, I think we are getting there. Things have really picked up. I think we are getting to that point that we are going to either have an eruption or we'll need to evacuate soon. So he would have the dialogue with the professor, the scientist at that time, and things started going very quickly. I would have alerted my staff that morning. I said, we need to prepare in the event that we go into a full 24-hour operation that day. So I would have informed them. We have our group WhatsApp chat. I would have informed them about 7 o'clock that morning, not to bother them too early, and start things in operation. I had my bag packed from home, so I know when I left home, I don't know when I was going to return. So much so that I left my windows open, and the house was filled with ash. But that's how it started that day in particular. And we went straight into briefing with the cabinet and the scientists, and then we went into a public briefing at 1 o'clock that afternoon. And then by the time we met again in the afternoon around 4 o'clock to really ensure that agencies were putting things in place to be ready, then we got that call from the scientists and said, Michelle, I think we are getting there. And I said to the Prime Minister, then we need to issue the evacuation order now. And that's how things started. And so everything went from one to the next. And it's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4:30 in the afternoon. People are trying to get home. People would have left home for the morning. How do you get buses up into the community at that time? But as I said, plans don't always going to work as you have them on paper, but there are some that did work. So we activated our response plan. We activated the National Emergency Operations Center at that time, and we went 24-hour operations for quite a while. And the Coast Guard would have activated their plans to evacuate persons from from the west coast into the safer areas. So that's how things started that day. I don't know if you want me to go further, but that's how things really started. Things really started to go into place. Then so the night was quite busy. We went round the clock evacuating, ensuring that the shelters were up and running and persons were really getting to the safe areas.
But we definitely want to hear more. But I want to include Dr. Joseph at this point and speak with her a little bit about what the scientists were called then to do on the ground. It's one thing to be working remotely or to be monitoring from time to time, but as things happen, what were the scientists physically doing on the ground?
Okay, so just to say that although we are based in Trinidad, the monitoring is continuous in all of the islands. It's 24 hours of data being looked at and analyzed. So in terms of the monitoring, it's done continuously. With respect to on the ground, though, as you rightly said, when there is activity, then we change our mode of operations, where we have the Trinidad-based team, and then we had an on-island team who were there for a more rapid in-person response. And the thing with St. Vincent is that not all islands have an on-island observatory, so to speak, but St. Vincent has a proper building that is a designated observatory. And so the first thing that we did was, when the effusive eruption took place, we reoccupied the Belmont Observatory full time and started our monitoring base on island from there. So when the eruption took place, of course, most of the team would have been hunkered down at the observatory, maintaining communications with the Seismic Research Center in Trinidad, making sure that communications were up. When stations went down on island, that we still had a redundancy here so that we could provide information to them. As you pointed out, when the explosion started, the density of the ash would have prevented a lot of visual observation even at the observatory. So this is where things like satellite imagery that we would have received from external collaborators would have been used to help guide us as to what was actually happening at the volcano itself. And so we had to do things like maintain the ground. The on-island team did things like, remember, electricity was lost and so on, so they had to maintain the generator systems, to clean the ash from the solar panels, to make sure that nothing was happening with the VSAT. That's the satellite, to allow communications via satellite, and that we were, to take any observations when photographs were possible, as well as when in between the eruptions, and they were able to venture out to go and start sampling the deposits and so on as the on-island team. I can't remember if you also wanted to know what we were doing here at Seismic. So in Trinidad, we were responsible for, as I said, being in close communication with the team, on a literally 24-hour basis. But remember, we were also doing the advisories twice daily to the government based on the interpretation of the monitoring data. We were providing constant information to the public and updates on what was happening, as well as the media and a wide variety of stakeholders, as well as working with SEDIMA and the NEMO, National Emergency Management Organizations, to respond to their needs, and making sure that the information that was being shared was recognized as official information versus miscommunication of for the lack of a better word, fake news, as often happens when there is a major event and misinformation is shared among the public. I hope this answers your question.
That's always a challenge. Yeah, absolutely. That's always the challenge. And, once we can get the time in, I want to delve a little deeper. I'm going to give all of you notice, because once you have your professional hat on, it's one thing in dealing with these things. But I think it's important to share how you are feeling on the inside, on a personal level as well, when this is all happening, because this can be a matter of life or death. It really is a very serious situation. And back at the Met Office here in Barbados, I know that we also had some Saharan dust, haze that was over Barbados during this time. Did it make it particularly difficult to detect the difference between the dust and the ash as it was covering Barbados?
Yes, definitely. Once the eruption, the main immediate present was volcanic ash. So at that point in time, even though there would have been some Saharan dust around, we were more concentrated on the volcanic ash because that took precedence at the moment. Once we started to see the concentrations waned, then you could see that the models there was some Saharan dust present, but it's really hard to determine which one is more significant at that point in time. So we would have had to change our messaging from volcanic ash to just haze advisory to take into consideration both the volcanic ash and both the Saharan dust. But it's very difficult because we're only looking at it from a visual perspective. So it was very difficult to distinguish between the two.
And Director Hines, you were in a clear position because you had to coordinate some cleanup efforts here in Barbados and to try to mitigate here what was going on here in Barbados, but also you had to reach out to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So let's talk a little bit about your effort coordinating how you assisted those impacted by the ashfall, both in Barbados and St. Vincent.
Um, like any incident or event that we would have, while you are responding, you have to be doing forward planning for the next particular cycle of the event. The whole question of activating the system, the damage assessment system, that was one which was foremost an issue at the time. Once we would have been able to have some level of visibility, then there would need to be some level of a damage assessment. So we get a situational awareness of what was happening, the type of impact that we had in the country. In addition to that, then the planning for the cleanup efforts, because we had to have a national cleanup campaign. And this was where all the various ministries were a part of this entire coordination. So it was not a DEM effort, but a whole of government effort with respect to activating and mobilizing personnel that would support that cleanup campaign, placing messages in the public domain so persons know what they should and shouldn't do at the time, and ensuring all the while also trying to support St. Vincent. Yes, Barbados would have been impacted, but we knew that we still had to render some level of assistance to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So those were things that we had to do in terms of trying to access resources to support, as I said, emergency supplies that we may have to send there. I was in constant contact with Ms. Forbes through the entire process, as well as persons at SEDEMA and wider donors in terms of what it was, how we would stage items, what would be our next move in terms of transporting items to St. Vincent, obviously based on their needs. And all the while fielding calls from our domestic public here in Barbados, as well as persons overseas, because we do have a significant sector of our population is from St. Vincent as well. And obviously persons would want to know what was going on in St. Vincent and around the Caribbean. And we tried as much as possible to place a lot of information on our various media channels. So placing the information that the Met Office would have sent out, Seismic Research Center, just putting that information out there, getting the feedback, trying to coordinate the emergency supplies, because now you have persons calling saying that they wish to assist St. Vincent and obviously assist persons in need here in Barbados as well. So trying to coordinate those efforts along with the other stakeholders, while trying to also ensure that the personnel within the system were still in a position to really um, action, to do these various actions, because there's also this sense of personal preparedness and ensure and wellness, really, to ensure that the personnel that was responding in the heat of the moment, that they were also safe in a safe environment to do so.
And that is most important. Let's to Vincent, tell us about your post-disaster efforts and in recovery mode at this point in time, because I know here in Barbados, ever so often you still recognize this is a little ashfall. This is ash. This is not dust.
Is that
That's
for
for
me? I
direct
think you were breaking
reports.
up a bit.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I
Okay. In
was
terms of
asking you
recovery,
about, yes, recovery.
okay, recovery efforts. Recovery is going to take a while. It's not an overnight process. We had to deal with first after the eruption season on the 22nd of April. We had to deal with the cleaning up first of all, and that took quite a few months. We had quite a bit of heavy ashfall in the communities closest to the volcano in Fitzhugh, Sandy Bay. We ourselves have a warehouse in a satellite warehouse in Sandy Bay, and we had to take off 16 inches of ash off of our roof. Then, so can you imagine some of the other houses that were closer, and some would have collapsed under the weight of the ash. So recovery efforts are going to go on for a while. We had over 20,000 persons displaced. Most persons have returned, but we still have a few pockets of persons who still have not returned as their homes are being constructed or being repaired. Over 200 homes have been repaired since through the Ministry of Housing and BRAXA, and their efforts now to the continue the construction of homes, 27 homes initially, for those persons who cannot return to their area or their locale. Because what we did after the volcano is to really map those areas where persons should not return. Those are areas that were affected by the lahars and could be affected by the pyroclastic flows. So we would have had demarcate areas that we, in our opinion, professional opinion, between the physical planning, the seismic research center, and our own work and our impact of hazards in those communities over a period of time. There are areas that are now clearly demarcated that persons should not return to because they can be affected by lahars, pyroclastic flows, and flooding in the future. And of course, some houses are buried, some are can be occupied in those areas. So as part of the housing recovery. And we also have to look at the road infrastructure, which haven't quite yet started, but we have been doing a lot of assessments of our road infrastructure with the Ministry of Transport and Works and BRAXA to determine how we go forward. One of the areas of recovery also is the strengthening of our seismic network. We would have lost quite a bit of equipment that were on the volcano itself, and of course we had to replace them, and we have to look at ways of improving the network. So we are pumping over $1 million into the upgrade of the seismic network and the monitoring system for St Vincent and the Grenadines to ensure that we are top of state of the art in terms of monitoring, and we have that information for our people. So recovery is at different levels. We have key agencies such as the Ministry of Housing, BRAXA, the Ministry of National Mobilization, Social Development, who have been looking at the social protection issues, the livelihood issues, the families, because once we have a disaster, it is people that are impacted, it's lives that are being impacted, it's livelihoods that have been destroyed or displaced. And so we had a lot of farmers that have been impacted. So there has been income support for farmers, assistance for farmers through the private sector, through NGOs in terms of seeds, seeds and replanting of their seedlings and plants. We have bumper crops now going on. I know that is one thing that Barbados always said that they did have bumper crops after 1979, and I have no doubt they will have some bumper crops this year also. So we are already seeing the greenery and that whole rehabilitation going on from nature. Nature is quite amazing how nature can bounce back or bounce forward and just you see the regrowth that is happening. So there's quite a bit happening in the recovery. We are working on also with the communities and looking at how to track the recovery over a period of time. Imagine a year on taking photos, and Dr. Joseph may have a bit more information on this, taking photos of your experience as you go through this phase from the eruptions last year to now. How has the landscape changed? How have things changed going forward? So recovery is going to be going on for a bit. It's important for us to really get persons back into their homes as soon as possible, back to some level of normalcy. Will it ever be normal? We may never be normal because of the pandemic and having to really pull up your roots and leave your home if you cannot go back there. So that recovery is ongoing, and it's all hands on deck still. It's quite feverish. We're still, pushing a lot to get persons back to that state where they were, or even better to what they were before.
How did the pandemic impact your recovery efforts, or how is that impacting your ability to be able to do what you need to do, get out into the communities, help those people who need to be helped? I know initially, even to sort that out for the shores was a little difficult.
Not so much now with the pandemic, because we probably just have a few cases now. So it is not really affecting our ability to go out. We actually just started to get back out into the community. So we'll have a community activity actually on Saturday as part of our Volcanic Awareness Month, and we have a church service on Sunday. So now things are okay. But just after the eruption, it was really difficult because we still had the heavy ash fall. The communities were still locked off, or not. We did not give access back to those communities. So then we had some challenges, but now it's pretty much okay. So the recovery is good, but the pandemic has affected us in different ways in terms of our supply chain management. A lot of the materials that we needed for rebuilding, there were shortages. You couldn't get building materials that you wanted in country on time. So you had delays across the supply chain network. That really did impact the recovery, and it even impacted our preparedness to in 2021, when we would have done our analysis to look at the gaps and the resources that we would have needed to manage this event. When we tried to procure materials or stuff, we were being told that it's a 6 months delay, and I think that is one of the things that really did impact us prior to the eruption, and even post in the recovery phase, in not getting the materials that on time that we would like.
And back to you, Dr. Joseph. What's the status of volcanic activity at La Soufrière at this time?
So at this time, we are very close to or at background levels of both seismicity, ground deformation, and degassing. So the volcano has returned to its in for the most part, to the pre-eruption phase. There is
So
still a lot
can
of
we
debris
expect?
around. Go ahead.
Yeah, can we expect any similar activity in the short term, 5 years from now? Because I know as scientists, you're constantly monitoring, as you said. So what can we expect?
So it is difficult to predict, and which is one of the reasons why investing in a very strong monitoring network is critical. We do need to use that monitoring network to look for changes in activity. The good thing about La Soufrière is that we know, based on our historical records and what is considered normal activity, and when it deviates from that normal activity, and that of course will alert us of changes, or changes in what may happen in terms of eruption, or so on. So with respect to something happening within the next 5 years, we will have to monitor it, because as was observed with this eruption, when it started in December, it started as a effusive eruption with very little seismicity, and so this type of volcano can start very, very quietly. So the density of the network and the strength of the monitoring is key in observing those changes. But also that St. Vincent is one of the most eruptive subaerial um, volcanoes in the region. So looking at the fact that there was an eruption in 72, then 79, now 2000, 2001, it does seem that it is becoming easier um, for eruptions to occur within a shorter time frame than has occurred in the past. So there's something to take note
Uh,
of and for us to look at.
Absolutely. And over at the Met, you too, like the scientists at the Seismic Research Center, you're constantly monitoring what's happening in nature. What are the lessons that the Met Office can take away from this experience?
Well, definitely one of the main things is to be ready for anything. We're accustomed to hurricanes, storms, and flooding every year, but not volcanic eruptions. So, one of the main things is getting the messaging out. We catered a lot to the aviation sector, and so we had to make sure that we have all of our systems in place for getting the information to the Grantley Evans International Airport. And then coming along with that also is making sure that we have the accurate information and getting the information out in a timely manner. So getting the messaging and tweaking it to volcanic eruptions and letting that be part of our impact-based assessment forecast. That's definitely one of the things that we have to include. We have to look back at what happened in 2021, see if there's anything within the messaging that we could change, how often we send out the advisories, stuff like that. Mainly getting the messaging out to the public, and also we have more tools that we can use to help us to get the messaging out as to when we can expect certain things. Is something that we have to go through and practice throughout the coming months, and always go back and look at the messaging, see what there is that can be changed, what we can improve on.
I've definitely seen a shift in the messaging because we know communication is key. And if I come back to you now, Director Hines, now that we've experienced this ash fall and we've seen how harmful it can be, the EM's plan to lessen any future impact of any such hazard.
One of the areas that we are focusing on, and hence the reason for events such as these, we introduced the concept of the Volcanic Hazards Awareness Week for the first time. This was an opportunity for us to reflect on what would have occurred last year, and also to mount a broad-based sensitization program, um, be it as it may in a virtual setting, um, so that we can sensitize the population to the volcanic hazards that may affect us. It also assists us in managing the expectations, really managing the expectations of the public and the various stakeholders. They will understand the threat of the hazards that may affect them, and give them tips in terms of how they can respond to them and reduce their vulnerability to these hazards. For us, it has been definitely a learning experience here in Barbados. And when we look at the system as well, it presents an opportunity as well for us to strengthen our emergency management system. Um, Look for where there were weaknesses in the system and see how we can improve on those, whether that is by having um, improving on our existing standard operating procedures and our plans and our policies. Obviously, the introduction now of a volcanic ash policy is one of the areas that we really have to be working on. um, so that when or if it occurs again, we are in a much better position. Um, I think ensuring that our system is agile enough it can scale up or scale down based on whatever hazard occurs. That is very important for us. Um, One of the other lessons learned in this whole scheme is the importance of collaboration and partnership, not only within the national space, but also in the regional and international space. I think that is very important. For us, this would have been, for a lot of us here in Barbados, this would have been the first time we had dealt with anything like this. Yes, we have the historical accounts, yes, we have the historical impact, but even in terms of how to, say, for example, the right ways of cleaning up the ash, mounting our cleanup campaign, it was important that we had um, the expertise or at least the input of persons who would deal with this on probably a more regular basis than us. So we had to reach out to the international community. So that really underscores really the importance of partnership and collaboration within the whole system, and the importance of planning within our sectors, planning as families, as individuals, planning as an entire national system and a regional system. And I think this, having experienced that last year, has given us opportunity really to look at what we can do better, and also note our strengths as well, but also seek to improve the processes that we now utilize um, within the national emergency management system and the regional system as well.
And let's head back over to Director Forbes and Nemo. I know there will be many lessons that you've learned in your organization that you can talk about, but share with us some of the core lessons that you now take into the future.
Well, of course, we have several lessons. We would have already conducted our after action review to really look at some of the lessons learned. What we did well, what didn't work, and what we need to improve on it in the future. And one of the things coming out of this eruption in particular, I think a lot of us didn't expect the volume of ash that we had. And definitely on looking at the communications part of it, we needed to pay a bit more attention on informing the public of how to clean up the ash, and what to do once you had the ash fall, cleaning your roof and all of that to avoid the collapse of the roofs. That is one area in terms of our communication. I think too, the volcano has shown us that we have to plan for those that come out of the volcano, because we don't know which one we are going to get with the next eruption. Communication is key in terms of our communicating on the risk and the hazards and how it can impact and affect us. Communication was one of the biggest challenges that we would have had, and we would have met internally and discussed ways on how we can improve it going forward. Our internal communication within the Emergency Operations Center structure, and how we disseminate to the public, because we see that when the public and the social media cannot get certain information, they run with their own story that they want persons to hear, which will not actually be the true story that we have. I think in the region and nationally, we need to look at the sector, building that sector resilience. And most of our disaster officers only have a few persons. In St Vincent case, we only have 19 persons, and Kerry may have similar. But this group of 19 persons alone cannot manage the event. So we need to look at building the sector and strengthening the sector resilience across the country. The agencies that support the national system, whether it is ministries that support the national system, we had a tremendous support from the public service and persons coming out to support for many months. and most of these persons were not involved in emergency management before. They had no clue what they were going to do, but they did fit in. But it's showing us that we need to have an all of government approach towards it. We need to have an all of society approach towards preparing for hazards in the future, and all hands have to be on deck. It cannot be the disaster offices only that prepare for emergencies. Each and every one of us at the community level, at the local level, and at the sectoral level. So we need to have that preparedness going at all levels. Some of the gaps we would have identified also, our warehousing capacity was totally exceeded. I mean, this is the biggest event that we have had to manage in a formal structure since disaster management was formalized in the region. So this is our biggest event that we've had to manage, and we need to also revisit it. It worked well for us. We don't need to sit back and say, hey, how can we improve the emergency support functions around whether it's logistics and support, because that was a challenge coming in, and so it's quite extensive. We would have had some good practices. I don't know if you wanted to have any good practices. Our collaboration with the region was excellent. Our collaboration with SRC, I think, is second to none. We have had a good partnership with them. Our collaboration in the regional response mechanism with CIDEMA, and the critical role that CIDEMA and the Department of Emergency Management and the government of Barbados played in supporting St Vincent and the Grenadines was really key. And it's a testament to the work we have done in the region at the national and the regional level, and the regional governments have done, because the Barbados Coast Guard was the first support, one of the first support coming into the country. Barbados and the Trinidad were the first persons coming into the country to support the national system, to support the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines who were displaced. So we have a lot of lessons learned, and we also have a lot of good things that is working for us in the region that we need to also promote.
Dr. Joseph, going forward, what has this event done to help shape what you do at the Seismic Research Center moving forward?
So one of the key things that Ms. Forbes indicated was that long-standing collaboration with the national disaster coordinators being a key to how we manage when or we respond when an emergency happens, or when there is a natural hazard or geological hazard. So the need to continue those collaborations during times of quiet, as well as in order to get the preparedness entrained within the public, so that they are not surprised and can respond accordingly when there is a disaster or when there is activity, it is key. Some of the other things that of course is key is the monitoring network, as she mentioned. The way in which SRC is financed, where we are supported by contributions from the different territories that we support. And these contributions allow us to do the work that we do. However, with inconsistent contributions, the strength of the networks on the islands suffer. And this is, of course, key to us being able to monitor for the activities, both seismic and volcanic. So we do enjoy good relationships with the national disaster coordinators, and this makes things a lot easier, and it is an important component in crisis communications, and it allows us to create these audience-centric products that help to build trust with the communities that we and the public that we provide information to and updates with. So these are some of the lessons that we learned and some of the challenges that we face with the eruption, as well as with our operations in general. So going forward, I think I'm hoping that governments can recognize the importance of contributing to the budgets of the Seismic Research Center to allow us to have the capacity to provide the service that we do.
Thank you. And I'm going to end on Director Hines. If you could share with us just the Department of Emergency Management. As you said, you've now moved to that place where you are, like Dr. Joseph said, opening the lines of communication during times of quiet. What would be your general message post this and considering how it impacted not only St. Vincent but Barbados as well?
I think it's important to re-emphasize the fact that disaster management is everybody's business. It is definitely a whole of society approach because the various hazards that affect us all, whether we are in business, whether we're within communities, whether we are part of the wider national emergency management system or stakeholder mechanism. So it is important that we play an active role, an active part in the preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. I think it is very incumbent on us that we need to do this in order for us to really truly call ourselves a resilient system. At the end of the day, we want to be able to, once we can't stop the effects of, we can't stop these hazards, but we can reduce our vulnerability, our susceptibility to them, and in so doing, find coping strategies and mechanisms to adapt to the various hazards that may come our way. I think resilience is the end point at the end of the day for all of us here within this system or within the Caribbean.
Thank you so much, Kerry Hines, Director of the Department of Emergency Management here in Barbados. We were also joined by Tia Brown, who is a meteorologist with the Barbados Meteorological Services at the Grantley Adams International Airport here in Barbados. Michelle Forbes, who is Director of the National Emergency Management Organization, or NEMO, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And of course, we were also joined by Dr. Joseph of the Seismic Research Center in Trinidad and Tobago. And there couldn't have been a better panel to share on this experience. Of course, we really could have gone on for an additional hour, just again sharing the experiences, and I'm hoping that we will be able to continue to share in this type of format so that we hopefully can reach many more people, not only in Barbados or Trinidad and St. Vincent, but indeed across the region. So thank you so much for being a part of this sharing of experiences response to volcanic hazards. And of course, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we want you to move away, not only listening to what was said, but most certainly taking it upon yourself that you are going to share with others and make a plan for you and your family as well as we continue to build on our responses to hazards across the region. Thanks for viewing.